Welcome to Architecting Intelligence. This is where we bring together the leaders, influencers, and experts who are shaping what's next across technology and industry. Each episode here is a conversation, it's not a keynote. The goal is to get past the headlines and into what's changing in the market, what's driving it, what it means for leaders making decisions right now. We will hear from people who are building, running, and scaling real systems, along with voices who see the broader patterns across industries. We want to hear from experts on what are leaders seeing in the field, what are they prioritizing, what are they learning the hard way. If you are responsible for or interested in strategy, operations, or technology, this series is for you. Today, we are talking about a topic that's getting thrown around a lot: sovereign AI. Much of what's out there right now feels like a marketing spin. Every vendor wants to be the first to slap their logo on this trend, and customers are left trying to separate hype from reality. Underneath all the noise, the concept of AI sovereignty brings up some very valid issues. Governments are pushing out new AI regulations faster than companies can adapt, and the boards are facing tough questions. Where exactly is our data stored? Who has access to it? What happens if a foreign actor or a foreign government orders our cloud provider to hand it over? Sovereignty used to be something only governments worried about. Now it's becoming an enterprise-wide problem, and most organizations don't have a strategy for it yet. To help us get past the marketing and into what's actually happening, I'm joined by Richard Stinon, founder and chief research analyst at IT Harvest. Richard has spent over 20 plus years tracking technology and the security industry, so he's seen firsthand how these issues play out in the real world. Richard, your firm tracks thousands of vendors. You watch how budgets actually move in the enterprise. When you look at the sovereign AI conversation today, how much of it is genuine urgency around what the kind of control that enterprises need versus vendors just finding a new way to sell the same boxes?
Yeah, great question, because it's got so many different facets to look at. I think the message around sovereignty plays extremely well in Europe. And they're the only ones I hear talking about it, right, as far as the enterprise itself. And that is always a geopolitical approach, right? It's like we need to be separate from the foundational models and frontier models based in the U.S., right? Of course, because otherwise we'll end up, paying all of our money to models hosted by U.S. companies and U.S. citizens. Same way that we feel about Chinese models, right? It's like, oh my gosh, we can't support them with our dollars. But the interesting nuance to me is sovereignty as treated at a microcosmic level of the enterprise itself. It's like, do I really want to be beholden and build my strategies for using AI around the potential for Anthropic or OpenAI, or down the road Grok or Microsoft? Do I really want them to be able to quadruple their prices overnight and or do what they've been doing lately, which is tease us with capability and then pull it back from us? In other words, is the fear driving a move towards open models? And I think for sure that the U.S. Being so frightened by Fable, and it was a little bit was Anthropic's own fault for doing so. One rather faulty report demonstrated how Mythos could find all these vulnerabilities and all that, and exploits, and that got certain agencies within the government so excited that they basically use what power they could, not laws, not regulations, just, hey, you're not allowed to let non-U.S. citizens use this. And that's difficult at Anthropic because they employ a lot of non-U.S. citizens. That action, we may have had like a 6 months head start over China. but that action gave an extra 6 weeks of that 6 months back to China, and caused a lot of people to start investigating using Chinese open weight models, which are, the models are free. The compute is not free for sure. And you've got the advantage that they're private and you're not giving your information to the Chinese if you've used the model locally. Now, unfortunately, the latest model, which is Kimi K3, is, I don't know, 2.1 trillion weights that you have to, and I've looked into what it would take to run it yourself, and it's it's a lot of money. It's like $1.2 million worth of NVIDIA equipment if you want to run it yourself, or use some, less if you use somebody's inference engine. And if you're Perplexity will probably offer it as one of the models that they have access to. So that's kind of all the facets of sovereignty are the nation state stuff, where you're deciding how do you stay competitive in the global scene, and should we, back Mistral in Europe or the UK's effort to have their own, and then how that impacts us is how do we use these models most cost effectively and provide preserving our privacy while we're doing that.
Thank you, Richard. I think as you are explaining, it's fascinating to hear how fast these technologies and these models are evolving, and how much of fear and uncertainty is there in the ecosystem as a whole, that you're talking about, an advantage could then become a disadvantage based on one misstep.
Right.
Look,
Easy.
when I hear often this discussion about sovereignty, it sounds less like a pure technology trend and more like a security doctrine. Look, this has to be operational, this has to be governed. It's just not declaring and meeting some guidelines.
Yeah.
The question to you, do you agree with that framing? And if so, or is it mostly being treated as a procurement decision instead of a security one? And how much should we all, as technology leaders, lean into this?
Yeah, I don't think we need the language of, using the word sovereignty to describe what we're talking about at all. It's a little bit like using the word resiliency. It arose from policymakers in the first place, right? It was the hot thing in Europe amongst regulators about 2 years ago, or capacity building, which is just a code word for increasing employment. So you really have to watch out when you're dealing with when the two sides meet, the technology world and the policy world, because they don't speak the same language and they try and adopt each other's words. And so I think we should stop talking about sovereignty and we should talk about, zero trust for sure, because it plays into that, and control, right? And it's actually zero trust in the original meaning of zero trust, which used to be, if I'm going to put data in somebody's cloud, I don't trust them to encrypt it properly. So I'm going to encrypt it with my keys before uploading it. That's zero trust. You don't trust a provider. You're going to prevent them from looking at your data. Same thing with compute. You don't trust the providers of the frontier models. So you're going to have versions that you control yourself.
We have a lot of delivery models and technology, some of them emerging. Talk about hyperscalers, neo clouds, national infrastructure providers, regional sovereign clouds. And we all know that the bottom line of this is the data and the controls around it. That's what we need to control, and we need to make sure that the workload runs wherever the data is. So, in your perspective or your experience and what you've seen, which of these delivery models are actually going to hold up over time to recognize this sovereign AI now?
Yeah, I think there are plenty of security controls around these delivery models that can make a lot of them work. There's federated data sharing, right? So you're using homomorphic encryption and multiple people can touch the data, but only in certain ways. But only the authorized people can see the data, including the model or the agent gets to see the data. So I think there'll be a lot of flexibility in how that is done. For critical systems, I think that, it's going to be in-house. You're going to have your own models running as many organizations do, even if they're paying the big bucks to OpenAI and Anthropic to run their models locally to ensure that OpenAI and Anthropic don't see your data, which would be perfectly reasonable in a healthcare situation, a financial services situation, which of course healthcare doesn't have very much budget, but financial services has plenty of budget for security, and they'll be able to do that. And we're passing through an era, just like we always do, where people are just implicitly going, I'm just going to implicitly trust OpenAI not to use my data because it's something, I don't think they'll compete with me. They're not going to publish my data. They wouldn't do that. Just the same way that we've always trusted Google not to abuse our data, even though they can read all of our emails anytime they want to, and they do. And all of our browsing activity, Google knows it, and they're there. And we're fine with that. And that's going to be the case with the vast majority of consumers. We, internally at IT Harvest, right? So we have to constantly query AIs about products held, because we capture all products from all security vendors. And initially, we were very frightened by the concept that we could make it possible, if our data was used to train or to educate a model, or just became available to the model itself, then somebody could go to their ChatGPT session and they could say, give me a report on every cybersecurity vendor headquartered in Canada, of which there are 141. And it can't do that today. All that ChatGPT, any of the models can do is Google searches. It's really, really good at Google searches, and you can do 50 in the time it takes you to do one. But you can't Google search the answer to that question at all. So we've been protected all this time, and I don't think the models will be offering application level stuff like that. But it is a lot of heavy lifting for us to constantly obfuscate vendor names. And we're probably 2 versions of models away where the model will immediately know who the vendor is. You can't hide it from the vendor just from the description and things that you ask it. So the models are going to be really, really smart very, very soon. So there's the impetus to just plow ahead. This is, speed is more important than those protections in this case.
Got it. So data controls, flexibility, portability, so that it's not on one model. Yeah, that's what I hear.
Yeah, and not reliant on one model, right? So you move at any time, right? So that, because keep these guys honest, right? It's we got to push off the time that they start increasing prices as long as possible, right? We got to continue to benefit from the prices dropping 99% every 12 months.
So let's put a buyer perspective here, like a CIO perspective. What should a buyer actually ask to tell whether a sovereignty claim from a vendor or a provider is real, especially in the infrastructure world or in terms of enabling this sovereign AI?
Yeah, that great question, because it's not easy to test, right? It's they rely quite a bit on contractual agreements, right? And we see that most in data sovereignty, which has been with us since the cloud came about. And frankly, Edward Snowden introduced a lot of the geopolitical concern about technology, and primarily U.S.-based technology, right? Because if there's one thing Snowden showed us, is that the U.S. intelligence agencies have their hands in the drawer of all of the technology vendors, the major ones. So that created distrust, and that created spawning European companies to take advantage of that distrust, right? I do like to point out, if somebody's going to be spying on you personally, right, and maybe detecting that you're earning cash on the side, whatever you worry about every day with spying on a personal basis, would you rather it be, if you're in Europe, say, would you rather it be the NSA, who has zero jurisdiction to knock down your door and arrest you for whatever infractions, or your local police, who do have that? Sovereignty means that the local police get to spy on you quite often, get to look at the data, The regulators get to look at the data, and those are just the ones that you don't want looking at your data. Whereas if China or Russia or the United States is looking at your data, no harm to you. There is geopolitical harm writ large, but so I think the distrust is misplaced because, as we're learning here in the U.S., you've got more to worry from your own government. It's always been the case than you do from a foreign government. So it just comes down to our privacy principles, right? We have to encrypt everything all the time, and we have to have protections, fail-safes, deadman switches against the government grabbing, confiscating your keys, for instance, or sequestering your keys. And that's, now if you're dealing with AWS and you're in Europe and you want your data to stay in Europe, you should probably keep it out of your own country. So take advantage of the federated system that the EU is. So there's some protection against just massive grabbing of all your data.
Let me ask you this, a hypothetical question. Like, imagine a CIO friend of mine who just met with their board, and the board has asked to come with a sovereign AI strategy by next quarter. What is the first mistake they should avoid? What advice would you give them?
So I would advise not to just, pay the big bucks to OpenAI. Right? This is your opportunity to look at more efficient ways to spend tokens. So I would advise that they just start small. Pilot project. Grab the latest Gemini model that's available, and run that for free. There are over 1 million open weight models available on Hugging Face. So grab the ones that seem to be fit for purpose and get used to hosting them and building them. And think about how you're going to do down the road reinforcement learning with those models so that you can build a better model for your particular application. And pretty soon you might have everything you need in one place. Come on, the models are so phenomenal right now. It's getting me every day. It's like, what is next? Are we going to see as far as capabilities? And so a open weight model, other than Kimi 3, is going to be behind the times, but you don't need Fable, right? Fable's like overkill for what you're trying to do, probably.
All right. So start small, be focused, prove it, ongoing control, and then evolve from there.
Yeah.
Let me ask you.
Part of that, a very critical part of that, you have to have an internal advocate for it that's totally excited and is just going to live and breathe this stuff. Can't be somebody who works 9 to 5 and takes weekends off, right? It's just got to be a fanatic.
Wonderful. Yeah. So I think, this has been a fascinating conversation. You've educated all of us. I will have an easy question for you now, which is about making the prediction.
All right.
What do you think, or imagine the sovereign AI conversation will look like in, say, 3 years time frame?
I think it'll be even more pertinent than it is today. There'll be many, many battles fought over it. I was just looking at the impact of these conversations on security post 2008. And I was looking at the balance between, so overall, we count 4,200 cybersecurity vendors in the world, not including China. And of those, 2,200 are in the US, 1,100 are in Europe. So Europe at large, I include Turkey in that because they've got some great cybersecurity companies. So 50%. So in 1,100 vendors is enough to give you complete coverage of all the tools you would need. And matter of fact, 150 is enough to give you complete coverage. So I think we've gone through this era, and now there is the capability for EU organizations to practice sovereignty in their choices for cybersecurity vendors. Not in each country, but if they stick to Europe, they can. And I think that It's even though it always feels like, oh, it's over. Anthropic is old news, and now Chinese models. We've seen enough of this to know that it's the rat race is going to continue. 3 years from now, it's hard. Of course, it's hard to predict. I like to say, anytime somebody asks me for a 3-year prediction, I can't look out further than 3 months. Right? It's not only is it moving fast, it's moving unpredictably. It's like if you're a futurist, how do you predict what it's going to? You could not have predicted where we are today 3 years ago. Just no way. There's things happening right now that are lined up with scenario planning from a group out of California. They called it AI 2027. We're only halfway through 2026, and we're right on track. By the end of this year, models will be 100% generated by models. And that means iterations, which have gotten down to about 3 weeks, those iterations could come every day. Just new improvements in models, and it just takes off from there. So, stand by. It's going to get exciting. Whereas the CISO at Anthropic said it's going to get really weird.
Yeah, no, I hear you. It is going to be exciting. Sovereignty will be a baseline. And as you said, with the number of vendors, number of technologies, collaboration across these ecosystems, it will be necessary. And then, as you said, AI itself will help, in terms of both the development of the model, automating, enforcing governance. So it is definitely going to be exciting. Thank you, Richard. Sovereignty, as you all know, stopped being a government topic. It is a boardroom topic, and the shift happened faster than most of the infrastructure teams were ready for. This is, as Richard was explaining, not a single technology decision. It's a series of choices about where data lives, who can reach it, what happens when those answers change without warning. It's about trust, transparency, governance. The vendors who win this conversation not will be the ones with the loudest sovereignty marketing. They will be the ones who can prove control of the data itself, no matter where the data sits, who can collaborate across the ecosystem to be winners. Thanks to Richard for bringing data, history, and his leadership to this conversation. And thank you all for joining us on Architecting Intelligence. Thank you.